Magda, thank you for joining me on the strategy sessions. What one thing do you wish you'd have known 10 years ago?
Hello, everyone, and thank you for having me. It's a great pleasure to be here with you. And, I watched a lot of the podcasts you are doing and, a big fan. 10 years ago, probably forever, Andy. I don't think it is 10 years ago, but a few years ago, I guess I learned that that attitude shift from frustration to fascination. And it had a massive impact on my life, both professionally and personally. And it's that being curious about things, that curiosity about what's happening around us, rather than saying, oh my god, how someone can say that, or how someone can think this way, or why things are happening in the way they are happening, but rather, wow, it's fascinating, let's find out more about the person, the market, the brand. So I think it is definitely that mindset shift, and this very simple switch of words from frustration about something to actually being really interested in why things are different.
And that speaks to a curiosity, doesn't it, of just wanting to peel back the layers and look into it and really get under the skin of it. And is that something then that you've taken? You said sort of personally and professionally, but have you taken that approach into your personal life as well? And because we're going to talk about your professional life and how you've kind of gone deep there. So, but have you taken that across everything that you do?
Oh my God, absolutely. I mean, what's happening around the world at the moment, you can say, wow, fascinating. You can be frustrated about things, but you can also see fascinating. People think in different ways. People are different. People, may not know about something. They have not traveled that much, or, they haven't, been that fortunate as others. So, that's a massive value and advantage of that. But, also just people around you, things around you, which are happening every single day. I think the curiosity about a person, about an event, is just much better for our well-being than frustration with something new or different.
And so professionally, that curiosity is taking you around the world as well. You've looking at the places you've studied and the qualifications you've got. You've sort of studied in 3-4 different countries and moved around the world. So is that the curiosity that's taken you there as well?
I don't know if this was curiosity. Some of these things. I mean, I could have probably, in hindsight, said yes, but some of this was just by a chance. I came to Australia because I met someone in Germany. So it was being curious, but it was probably, something else than that. But generally, I think, that openness to learn from others and listening more than talking, and asking questions. I think that's definitely something which I practice every single day, and it's definitely paying off in both professional and personal life.
I mean, you've put a dagger straight through my heart there as a podcast host when you've said listening more than talking. When I listen back to some of the old episodes, it's like I wish I'd have listened more than talked. So I've a deliberate plan to shut up a little bit more in this series and listen to the guest more. So.
Yeah.
Brilliant. Well, look, thank you very much for that start. Have a listen to this, and then we'll be right back with Magda. Hey up, and welcome to the Strategy Sessions. My name is Andy Jarvis, and I am the most excited man in the marketing world at the minute right now. That person you've just heard on the introduction talking to me was Magda Nenycz-Thiel from the Ehrenberg-Bass Institute. This podcast launched in May 2020. It's almost 5 years old. And right from back then, I was like, how do I get someone from the Ehrenberg-Bass Institute on? And I've been waiting for the right time. A couple of months ago, Niels Wimby recorded an episode with me, and he mentioned he'd been on stage with Magda and gave this great quote: learn, test, and learn, rather than just test and learn. And that gave me the in. I reached out to the Ehrenberg-Bass Institute. A couple of weeks later, here's Magda on. It is, honestly, it's my life, mate. It's wonderful. So I would just like to thank Magda and Aubrey and the team at Ehrenberg-Bass Institute for making this happen, and also for Niels for mentioning Magda in the first place. So before we get back to the bit that you want to hear, which is Magda's episode, I just want to tell you about two things. So firstly are the workshops I'm doing with Seth Godin. The next one is in Dublin on the 3rd of April, so couple of weeks' time. And it's going to be 1 till 5 at the Guinness Enterprise Centre. And the third one is in the first one was in Belfast and sold out. The third one is in Derry on Monday, the 2nd of June. That's at the Wall City Brewery, 12:30 till 4:30. All the details and a link in the show notes, including a discount code for that. So if you want to come along, please do. Seth joins us on screen from New York, takes you through a whole load of strategic things for your business. And let me tell you, I've done marketing strategy for over 10 years, and I learned so much in it. It's such an exceptional session. So full details come along. And for anyone who's in or near Mexico City, there is a workshop which I'm part of, or a boot camp, as we're calling it, on Saturday the 5th. It's myself, Felipe, and Ronan. Ronan is based in Mexico. Felipe is traveling from Colombia for the session. And we're running this thing about human-centric marketing. You've probably heard me say talk to your customers at some point, and it's about how do we put the human back in that. Prices and everything are both in Mexican peso or US dollars, and there's a link in the show notes to that as well. So if you're near Mexico City, and you want to come along to that, it'd be fantastic to see you there. Enough of me selling you things. Do click the show notes if you want. Leave a 5-star rating wherever you listen to the podcast. And now I'm going to shut up and get you back to me interviewing Magda. Here we go. So, Magda, we can see from where you sat. If you're watching the video anyway, you can see from where Magda's sat. She's at the Ehrenberg-Bass Institute at the University of South Australia. It would be a crime if I didn't start by talking about possibly the most famous things to come out of the Ehrenberg-Bass Institute and potentially the most important book in marketing history. There's probably a few other runners for that title, How Brands Grow. So let's start by talking about that and the impact it's had on the marketing world. Can it be understated? Can it be overstated, the impact it's had? It's been huge.
I think both, right? Because like we can see some organizations really taking the evidence-based approach very seriously and, globally, cross-functionally. It's not only the book. I think sometimes the misunderstanding a little bit is that, you can change the world with just one book, but it is just that openness, that curiosity of thinking about, okay, how can we make our approach to growth more evidence-based? And here, yes, I've seen some amazing shifts, and I've been fortunate to lead some of that. And, that's definitely something which we can say, wow, some organizations have done it in an amazing way. But then there's so many that have not been exposed, It's a slow process. It's like, Byron sometimes talks about starting to get people to wash their hands in hospitals. And I think it's a very good analogy too. We've got still so much potential and so much work to do around the world. So I think both. I think we've got still a lot of opportunity. But if I, look at some organizations and the language they use and the evidence-based approach they have to growth in all the areas of demand generation, I think it's absolutely amazing that, something which is coming from, Australia, Adelaide, can have such a massive impact on the world of growth.
So is it called, is it the Semmelweis effect, about the washing, we were talking about washing hands in hospitals. I probably mispronounced or got the name wrong.
No, that's fine.
So do you think in 50 years' time we'll be talking about the Sharp effect in marketing of how...
Might be. It might be. Yeah. And, in some organizations, it's already happening that, it's fascinating to see how people leave some organizations where the evidence-based approach to growth have been introduced and they go somewhere else and they say, oh my God, I can't work in a different way. There's nothing else for me, right? So they then do this their way. They bring their own, flavor to it. They might be using their own words and they may be adjusting this to the environment, the culture of the organization, but they'll never go back to the Middle Ages. And I think that's the beauty of this. It's like a spreading effect of once I have learned something, once I know how to look at data, how to ask the questions, how to set up hypotheses, how to be curious about, let's see what happens, but have that learn, test, learn approach. I think Niels was talking about in his podcast. Yeah. I think it's very hard to go back to something which, was happening before.
And that quote from Niels, your quote that Niels mentioned on the podcast. Yeah. So if you've not listened, there's a link in the show notes. A couple of episodes ago, Niels Wimby mentioned the quote you used, learn, test, learn. So in marketing, we talk about test and learn all the time. But actually, we need to say it's learn, test, and learn. So instead of just thinking we're going to have a starting point. We've really got to understand the science behind what we're doing and then test and learn. So what was the context of you saying that on stage, and what kind of maybe frustrations or curiosity took you to kind of come into that approach?
I think it was just that, throwing something at the wall and hoping that it sticks, rather than coming up with objective hypothesis. Why am I asking that question? And has anyone have done anything before in that area? Maybe we have done something in the past. Check global benchmarks, de-average the data, start from the context, and then set up a hypothesis and do that testing, and then learn from it for the future. We have to leave a legacy of learning in the organization. If we don't do this, then every single thing is a new question. It's usually never new. Someone has done it before, or we actually have done it before. It's just the kind of company memory monitoring what we've done in the past is very poor, and I think that's something which I'm a huge advocate of. Rather than asking questions to the consulting companies every single day we do something, let's create that muscle, that capability within the organization, empower people to know things and to be curious about them, and to do more testing with good hypotheses behind them.
I think as a consultant, I'm going to say consultants thrive on ignorance. We get brought in to solve problems when people don't have that memory in-house. So don't listen to Magda's advice on that. Don't do that. But I think that
I probably want to say that there's definitely a place for good consulting, and some things cannot be done in the same kind of speed and whatever within the organization and with the global benchmarks and with the outside of view. But there's too many questions which we can solve internally, and we should, because otherwise we're not building that muscle. We are not empowering people. We are not creating that capability, which, we're only outsourcing. And I think that's probably the biggest problem.
And I think to go back to your hand washing example, or, maybe the challenges and the pushback to how brands grow. And I think I'm probably being even guilty of this myself. On first reading, there was a few things where I raised my eyebrow and I was like, is that right? Are you sure? Because it almost was so contrary to the gut feel approach, if you want to call it that. Is marketing an art or a science? Well, I'd kind of always thought it was slightly more art than science. Not all one way, but just slightly more art. So it was a real challenge to everything I thought about marketing, really. And do you think is that what sort of led to such a pushback to some concepts in the book? Right? Do you think?
Yeah, I think so. I think, it is emotional. Many things, if you practiced something for years and you were trying to convince people that that's the right thing to do, and you really believed in this, and then you read something and you go back to the data from your organization, and you see that the beliefs you were holding are in fact, contrary to the
just wrong.
But I think
that's
wrong. But and I think that's good. I think that's normal. I think human beings should learn and change their minds. And in the institute, we might be talking about the culture here, but it is the culture of science and life is self-correcting. We believe in something. We are exposed to evidence. We look for more evidence because just one piece of evidence is not enough. So you try to have that generalized approach to something. And, if you find that there is evidence, we are changing our minds. And I think the best leaders I ever worked with, is that a CMO or a GM or CFO, they will stand there and they will say, I thought this, but now I don't. We actually have to change, because otherwise we are not increasing the odds of our investments being successful. If you think about what evidence-based approach, which means how brands grow, how categories grow, it doesn't matter. It's evidence-based approach to growth. What does it do to the organization? It is increasing the odds that the investments will have the required outcome. So who doesn't want to do this? Yeah. Everyone, we are placing bets with the company money behind many different things. So you want to make sure that you've got more investments that are successful. Is that media? Is that pricing? Is that NPD? But that's what the culture of the kind of idea of evidence-based approach is.
I'm going to touch on the culture then, because you brought. I had it down for later on to talk about, but we're going to talk about it now
Right.
because I find it fascinating. You have some of the biggest brains in the marketing world working at the Ehrenberg-Bass Institute, and I imagine that could actually be quite nerve-wracking. Be almost like, look how many smart people around here. But I sense, and I suspect that it's actually quite a positive place to work with everybody. Kind of, have you thought about this and have you thought about that, rather than trying to get one up on each other? Is that what it's like, sort of being inside the machine?
Yeah, it is definitely. I would say I would use the British word interesting at the beginning, right?
Yeah.
You feel like wow, like, but then you are really encouraged again to be curious, to ask questions, and if you don't ask questions, that's not the right attitude. So actually, you should be asking questions, and I think the time to learn is now. So you want to learn from the best, but I think it's also being humble and modest about we know one thing, and we are academics, we work a lot with the organizations around us, but having that mutuality aspect that yes, we are making organizations more evidence-based, but they are making us relevant. So it's always being curious about what's outside of us, so that we never stop being relevant. And I think that's yes, we are smart in some ways, and yes, all of us kind of have degrees and have to be hungry for knowledge, but we also want to learn and being exposed to anything which is around us, and actually holding two different ideas at the time, and being able to make sense out of them, and being able to have your view on that, and having an argument which is evidence-based and not that's my opinion, that's the culture here. So you get used to this as well, but it's definitely the world outside challenges you challenges us in different ways. And I think I would never like us to lose that mindset of we can still learn so much from observing the world, and again being fascinated about things outside of us.
It almost feels from the outside, though, like within the Ehrenberg-Bass Institute, that you're wearing three hats. So you have three jobs, because you've got the research you're doing, academic research you're doing, which are maybe being published in papers or journals or whatever.
Yep.
You work with some of the biggest names in the world, companies to look at their science that might help them grow as well. But you're also still an academic. You're a doctor, and you work with PhD students and you mentor them. What's the right word? It's not mentoring, is it? But you work with them as they're putting their thesis in.
Yeah.
Is that quite difficult to sort of switch between the three different lanes that you're in, or is it just really normal for everybody there?
I think it's normal. I've been here 20 years. So for me, it's very, very normal. I think getting used to the fact that, you can't fall behind in some things, because you are still in a business of making discoveries.
Yeah.
And then the dissemination of the discoveries can be in different ways, right? Mm-hmm. It is the academic dissemination. And I mean, everything what we are doing is peer reviewed, and that's the biggest difference to the others. And then the dissemination, I think, again, our duty is to communicate something easily and clearly, and in a context to our sponsors and to the outside world, not non-sponsors, in a way we are publishing in the academic journals. So I think it is actually easier if you can see the link between everything what you are doing. We are, again, as I said, the relevance is very important for us. So if we research something which is then published in an academic publication, it's also relevant. It's just a different language. It's a different outlet, but it has to be relevant, right? If it is relevant, our sponsors will be interested in this. So the challenge is, okay, how do we communicate this? How do we package this in a way which will be relevant in the context, which will be in a language which is cross-functional. It's not only speaking to one function within the business. But I think that's the easy.
There's a podcast here in the UK called the High Performance Podcast, which just interviews mostly sports stars and athletes about what keeps them at the top of their game. It has diversified a little bit, but they're sort of fascinated in what drives high performance culture. And I just want to drill in a little bit more, a bit like they would. And, are there sort of two or three things that maybe everybody who works there has a similar, sort of view of the world of certain things? Or what are the things that drive that high performance culture? Because, to have sort of had one hit with, with how brands go. But it's not just that. We're going to talk about some of your work in a moment as well. There's lots and lots that's come out of the Ehrenberg-Bass Institute that constantly goes at high performance. That's not easy to keep up high quality over a long period of time. So what are the couple of things in there that you think are maybe your secrets? Well, not so secrets, because hopefully you're about to tell us all.
That's right. I think it is that, being skeptical and open-minded. I think if you are that sort of person, or you are open to being that sort of person of, questioning things and learning from others and seeing, again, that's kind of this kind of fascination with the world. I think curiosity. I think this is something which, everyone around here kind of has to have to, for such a long time, have that, drive to help organizations. I think that, again, that mutuality aspect and knowing that our main role is to make organizations more evidence-based, to help them, to bring that value, and in turn expect that they will be making us more relevant. I think, again, just knowing that is extremely important. And I think also just to be able to combine making discoveries, learning every day, and work with the biggest brands in the world, travel, being exposed to, some of the amazing work done by our sponsors. Wow. It's not maybe for everyone, but it's definitely something which attracts people to this place and attracts everyone to that coherent culture. I think it's not that everyone has the same view of the world. I don't think this will be good.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Right? We can have the same approach to, yes, we want to be evidence-based. And I think this is something what binds us. But everyone here is different. And I think again, those differences are fascinating. And I think, by putting everyone together in the same pot here in the Institute, I think we are getting that result of that high performance culture you just mentioned.
And I think with high performance cultures, I'm not going to ask you to comment on this, but often you see with high performance cultures, people either when they join, either very quickly realize what's expected and thrive in that culture, or very quickly realize what's expected and leave because it's not for them and they're not used to operating at that high note, isn't it? And I don't know if you see that. I'm certainly not naming names, but do you see that when people join, they either kind of come in and keep walking around and go straight out again, or they're there for 20 years? Is that kind of what happens?
Yes. I mean, there's some of us who have been here for a while, some of us for whom more kind of research is not what they want to do, and they will be thriving in the same approach. I think once you are here, the approach stays with you. Yeah. I think that evidence-based mindset, this will stay with you. But if you want to be an academic or not, if that's something for you, that's a very, very different question, right? So some will be extremely good taking that approach to an organization and actually joining an organization. And we are really clear about this in the Institute, that your career can go in many different ways, right? And I think that's something which, again, having that flexibility of being evidence-based, being skeptical and curious, take it outside as well. Take it and make sure that organizations are living and breathing that. So I think that's crucial as well.
So let's talk a little bit more about the research that you've been doing recently, which has been focused on category growth. And I read the paper Rising Tide, which is, again, I'll link to that in the show notes. So I loved it. It was a great read. Tell us about the challenge initially, because you're looking at category growth, and perhaps some of the findings, some people might go, oh, yeah, that kind of makes sense. But actually, the data and the research that before you started was not uniform, was it? There was a lot of different viewpoints.
No, I think, everything is obvious once you know the answer, right? So, even like how brands grow, people are saying, brands grow by acquiring more consumers. Yeah.
Who'd have thought?
But it was not obvious, right? And if you look at marketing plans, you can still see loyalty as the objective, and making those who are buying us more, buy more, and so on. So I think every discovery has that problem that some people will say, oh, of course it was like this. But how did the category growth research came about? Was definitely a call from sponsors, and back then from kind of one particular sponsor about, it's definitely much more than just focusing on brands. So we know how brands grow, and that's fantastic, and we are applying this. But in some instances, one brand can be half of the category, or some brands are leading the category. And then the brand growth, especially if we are just focusing on share, is changing to stealing and shifting and buying share rather than the quality growth. So how do brands grow? Brands grow through expanding categories, and especially the bigger the brands, as you read in the paper, the more of your growth, 70% of your growth will come from category expansion. So we do need to start with, first, how does the category grow? And brands will be growing better and faster if the category is expanding. So, what is our ability and how to grow that category given category conditions is the question we are trying to answer. And, this research is ongoing. We are just releasing one main publication we are very proud of, and we'll be talking about this. But it's definitely that, start with category first, and then, where to grow, with what to grow, and then how to grow are the three questions for us to be asking. But first it is, how does the category grow? How mature is the category? Maturity of the category dictates the lever to pull in a particular category, and the levers to pull dictate what portfolio is needed and what investments do we need to have. Also, it is driving the prioritization. A business can't focus on everything. I mean, we will never say, grow everything. So, where is the highest likelihood for a category to grow? And then once we've got that, then, how to pull the levers and which levers to pull is kind of the starting point. And then it doesn't matter if that's a small brand, big brand, premium, non-premium. All brands will grow. They have to by acquiring more consumers. The ways to grow, the toolbox might be different, of course, but there's one KPI for brands which is clear, and that's penetration.
And there was a line in there, I think I'd written it down correctly, that growth's actually quite hard to achieve, isn't it, for a lot of the time? Something like there's only 5% probability that a firm can grow at just 2% for 4 successive years. And I've just said a lot of words there, but 2% growth for some companies is probably quite a modest achievement. But to be doing that for 4 successive years is effectively very, very rare, is what I think the stat shows. Yeah, every marketing plan that's ever written anywhere in the world will have X% growth every single year it's written built into it. But the stats are there. It's actually really difficult to grow consistently, isn't it?
Yeah, absolutely. I think the research by Charles Graham, by Dr. Charles Graham, has shown that it's extremely rare. I think 1 in 10 brands will grow year-on-year market share, and we are talking about market share, right? And I think again that's very important for us to understand that where is that coming from, and again is that it's coming from what are we doing to grow that market share, and usually you are using the toolbox of price promotions, limited time offerings. You're using a lot of things which cannot have a long-term impact. So if you
effectively just think pinching it off the competition, aren't you?
That's right.
And then they increase their investment and pinch it back. Yeah.
It is something which is very easy, lazy. We are doing this, and we have to do some of that. But kind of switching that view to we need to earn share. So we need to do something hard and something which will stay there, and something which has the long-term impact ability in our toolbox. That's the category growth mindset, because that's something which, again, will perhaps help the whole category. That's fine. That's okay. But if we're going to focus on exceptional execution of what we are doing, we should be taking the highest growth in that category from that. So it's really not focusing that much on competition. Competition is extremely important, and all the metrics should be competitive. But let's just move away from just thinking about share to thinking about we want to expand the category. And then obviously, how do we do this? Through investments in our brands, big and small. That's fine. But starting from this will take us away from this thinking that, we've got that kind of share snacking, I say, mindset of I will take some from this, I will take some from that. And, and we are definitely not expanding our toolbox here. But I think going back to your point about growth is hard. growth is, and it should be.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And it should be,
Should
right?
be.
Like it is something which we are all being paid for something which should not be that easy to copy and not easy to follow, right? I mean, some of this will be, and it should be managed with a spreadsheet, and something which should be made quite predictable in the organization. Everything what we want to stay and will be long term, that's something which actually we need to focus on for a bit longer, rather than we've done this in the past. Let's have exactly the same what we've done next year. So I think pushing a little bit for, harder or smarter ways to earn share is the whole idea of, expanding categories and stopping thinking about competition that much.
And I think on the category expansion, there was definitely a demarcation between kind of the category leader and the smaller firms,
Absolutely.
wasn't it? In terms of, the leader will gain more by growing the category. The smaller firms might be better. And there's variation within that, isn't there? But by and large, if you're a smaller firm in a category, market share is where your focus could be. And so is that broadly the split?
It is. I think what the data is showing that, if you are bigger, the majority of your growth should and will come from category expansion. If you are smaller, majority of your growth will come from share. But it is not to say, and obviously, like if you are 40-50% of share in a category, you can think, okay, like I can steal something from the small ones, but really, like I need to enlarge the pie. I really need to think about this. It's very hard to then kind of play that share stealing game and grow. You can be stable, but to grow it's hard. But if you are small, the mindset is still category growth mindset. Of course, in the metrics, your growth will come from share. That's normal. You are still too small for you to have, massive impact on the category. But your mindset, so what you are doing, again, the toolbox you have, should still be, how do I do something for the long term? It might not have the same impact on the category, but I would not like our sponsors or anyone who is listening to this podcast to think that, if you are small, you should be running just price promotions. That's exactly the opposite of what we are talking about here. I mean, if you are small, it's so hard. Small brands have it harder. You are familiar, Andy, with the double Jeopardy effect. Mm-hmm. Smaller brands have fewer consumers who are buying them slightly less often. In fact, our research on tiny brands, small brands, is showing that it's even harder for those small brands. They've got even less loyalty than they should, given their small size. So it's extremely hard for them. So they need to focus. They need to be crystal clear on what they're doing. They can't be distracted. They have to focus on something and, making sure that they are developing exceptional expertise in that. But even that, developing exceptional expertise in something, is that e-com or, is that approach to route to minds, that's category focus. It's not a focus of I'm going to steal share, because if that's the focus, then the majority of small brands will not be, and they are not, in the market next year.
So you mentioned a sponsor, but if you were talking through a brand, whether it's your sponsor or not, I know from having similar conversations with my clients, when you talk about trying to grow the category or the sector or whatever, one of the pushbacks you get is, but this is going to help the competition. And I've never felt armed with the evidence to be able to debunk that properly. But the fact is, it will help the competition, but it'll also help you. And that's the key thing, isn't it?
Yeah, I think there's many reasons why that category focus is important, and one is that the majority of brands, so if you talk about packaged goods, FMCG, they are selling through customers, through Walmart, Tesco, Asda in Australia, Woolworths, and Coles. Mm-hmm. Woolworths, Coles, Asda, Tesco, they are not interested in growing your brand. They are interested in growing the chains. So they stores through categories they sell. So you need to have a good category story. You need to be interested in more than just you, thinking about how do I take this outside of my brand and not only sell it, but actually make it about the whole category. And if you've got that, then yes, your brand should be benefiting the most, but you also should be open to some of my portfolio may not be on shelf next year. Mm-hmm. Because this is not helping the customer to grow the category. Now, can I still have that somewhere else outside of the biggest players? Yes, you might. But to kind of play that game, to be on shelf, in fact, is the price for being on shelf, right? You need to think about everyone around you. And if it is like in sports, right? If you are I always give that analogy. I think I said this in a different podcast. You've got an athlete training for the Olympics, and one is taking drugs, and it's kind of on that. I'm going to have great performance on a day, but they are not doing anything good for their long-term performance, nor anything good for the team or for the whole discipline. And you can think about examples from some disciplines where this was happening.
Uh-huh. Yeah.
Versus someone who is really training, spending a lot of time in the gym and thinking about their long-term performance, but also pushing others. We should be all being better together. And I think that's that mindset, and if we all have, and if we know that there is competition, of course, and we know the competitive context very well. We know the category dynamics. We're not looking only at us, but we are thinking that if we make the category better, if we let in more people in some of the subcategories we are creating, if we, in the most mature categories, expand the more premium subcategories, my God, that's great for everyone. And even if you think about if a category is being advertised just by one player, that's hard for that one player. If you have more people supporting the category, it is just much easier. So there's so many examples which you can bring and give for people to start thinking about, wow, it's actually good for all of us.
And I wonder, one of the difficulties in doing this for an organization to be able to focus on category growth, because you do spend an awful lot of time in an organization, whether you're doing competitor analysis or whether sometimes you've just positioned yourself against the competition, because we are better than that thing or we do it different to that thing. So you spend a lot of your time looking at why you're different and better than them. So then to have part of your brain thinking, but we also need to work with them to grow the category while still being competitors. It almost feels like a coalition government where they've got two different parties in power and you go, we've got to make all this better, but we've also got to make it look like it was our idea and not their idea. And, it's actually quite a difficult dance to do for a marketing team and a business, isn't it?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think, having those two heads is extremely, extremely important. And, explaining and showing in data the importance of thinking about the whole category, but then really knowing what's good for us and our brand, because obviously you can't be driven just by what the customer wants, right? So you have to have that mindset of it has to be mutual for the organization, it has to be good for the company, the customer, and the consumer, right? So having kind of that mindset of it has to be good for everyone, it's very, very important. But I think starting with the category, and it also forces you to understand the category well. I think what we are sometimes not doing is we're coming with, that's what we want to do. And, we want to have a frequency of 16 and we want to have a price of whatever dollars per kilo and whatever. And then you have those plans and you think, oh my God, something didn't work. No, if we understand the category well, if we understand how brands compete, so your duplication of purchase by different metrics, if we understand the pricing structure, if we understand the different pack sizes and how they interact, if we understand all those different things about how often a brand is bought versus how often the category is bought, the distribution of buying, all those different things which are about category are helping us to put our brand in context and not expecting the unexpected. If we understand the likelihood of a particular category growing, you were talking about setting plans for brand growth, but I've seen a lot of plans for category growth, which are unrealistic. A category will not grow this way. And if you put plans like this, you will burn your business because yes, you can grow like this for a year or two. But I think starting from those understanding the odds, and we say, what are the odds and how to beat the odds? So what are the odds of my category growing? And then with my brand, can I beat the odds? What to do? And that's you can say you are saying something being different or whatever, but that's your investments. That's what you do, the portfolio you are putting in there, the pipeline of innovation which is needed for category expansion, the way then you create your pack price architecture in a sophisticated way and not in, I'm increasing prices on each pack in exactly the same way. That's the hard-earned share task.
Yeah.
But in the first instance, you have to understand the category very well, walk in the shoes of the category, understand the category rules, and this will help everyone in the organization to be a better brand manager.
And the research that you've done, the Rising Tides paper, was that just focused on packaged goods?
This was just focused on packaged goods, yes.
Is it an unfair question to ask? Do you think that it would therefore be replicable in other sectors, or is that where you're taking the research next?
Yeah, it is a good question. Our main research on category expansion includes pretty much everything what is sold, for example, in Walmart, right? So they have very different products, really, from shoe polish through to dog food, and I don't want to talk about other things being sold in Walmart, but this
it's America,
plenty of
right?
different things, right? That's right. So you can see you can think if that's applicable, that's probably applicable as well. Of course, there is areas for us to look at, like B2B services, when we should be putting hypotheses about, why it could be different, what other conditions are important for other categories. And again, this is how research in the institute is being done. You start with something which you observe over different conditions, and then you enter new conditions. You start thinking, okay, like that's fascinating, but let's see if that's similar. And I've done some research for sponsors in B2B. We see the same patterns, but there's a whole world outside of that where we can start thinking, okay, do the same rules apply?
Yeah. No, excellent. So good, because I know we get listeners from lots of different categories, agencies, in-house. So just so that people are listening, going, is it just rinse and repeat for my category?
Yeah.
But we think it might show the same, but there's a lot of more research still to do there. And is that where you go? Is that the next 2 years for you, is going really deep on category growth and looking at all the different angles?
It is. I think the problem with research is that the more you know, the more you want to know, or the more you know that you don't know.
Yes.
So it is definitely, asking the next questions coming out of this. And, there's so many things about, we've seen in the last couple of years, organizations taking a lot of price. So and they had to, because of the rising cost of goods and rising cost of energy. And it definitely had a negative impact on the volumes and hit the units. And there's definitely a question on how to sustainably premiumize a category, across the different parts of your portfolio, across channels and occasions. So that's a big question we are trying to answer. There's a lot of hype about how to make category more premium, but actually how to do this, how to do this in a sustainable way and not only using that lever of price for this. So this is just one example of what we do. We've got just research being almost finalized about that mental availability aspect of category expansion. So you can obviously think about physical availability and innovation and making the category more premium, but what about mental availability? What about those memory structures? And that's something which has been just being done. So there's so many different angles you can think about, and yes, definitely will be something for probably the rest of my career.
Well, premiumization is something that comes up relatively frequently, and obviously with Nils we talked about it with Volvo, and not a packaged good, a bit bigger than that, but the fact that Volvo have been on the premiumization journey for over a decade now, and I don't know, I have no insight to it, but I don't think they would consider themselves finished with that journey just yet either. It's actually going premium is quite a difficult task, isn't it? And taking a brand or a category premium that's a huge undertaking.
Yeah, absolutely. And, you can think about different ways of making a category or a brand more premium, because for some organizations in packaged goods, it can be channel play, it can be pack price architecture done well. You can start premiumizing really well, looking at your different subcategories. But then for some, it is definitely thinking, what technology do we need to be able to jump on that different curve of being more premium? But I think the biggest challenge in that area is that, if we think about something very premium, it's usually small. So our focus then should be penetration focus. We should let more people in rather than develop and bring new, more premium offerings. Because then if we just bring something more premium all the time, we are just fragmenting and we are creating smaller and smaller and smaller parts of the market. We should be thinking about how do we enlarge a premium part of our portfolio, so let more people in. And that's, again, your category focus. You need to think with the customer how to expand the shelf for that, right? Because obviously, like, if you think about how do I shift volumes from something less expensive to something more expensive, the shelf is not elastic. I need to give up on something to let more people in. So there's a lot of aspects which we can see are, the questions for us to ask. How fast do I get something? If I focus on getting somewhere fast, I'm probably starting to have too high volume objectives, and I'm starting to price promote. I'm starting to lower the price because I want to get, and that's not the way as well. So a lot of tricky questions in the premiumization area, which I think our sponsors are dealing with.
And we can absolutely edit this question out if you don't want to answer it. Have you done any work in the luxury sector, sort of super premium stuff? Because for International Women's Day, I did a countdown of the top 5 episodes featuring female guests, and the number one was Ashley McDonnell, who works in luxury goods. So she's at Puig now and has been at various other sort of top-end brands. But we talked about how luxury sometimes works almost the opposite to regular marketing. Hermes reducing demand reducing supply, so they can drive up demand. And how, so you said about how we maybe need to bring more people into the category, and they're actively trying to push people away. Does luxury work? Is it just entirely on a different planet, or does it still conform to the same rules that you're talking about, both in how brands grow and in your current research on category?
Yeah, it's a great question, Andy. It's a great question, and we've had some research done on this, of course. It's interesting because luxury has already penetration barriers. Mm-hmm. Right? So it is already more expensive and it's quite often harder to find. So to your point, it actually works in exactly the same way when it comes to like breaking that barrier and letting more people in is the main challenge. And if you think about this, our research which has been done last year or maybe 2 years ago about physical availability actually shows us that, the bigger the luxury brand, the bigger physical availability it has. So, and having more physical availability for a luxury brand has no impact on the brand being perceived as being luxurious.
Really?
So, no, absolutely not. In fact, bigger brands have more physical availability and they are perceived as more luxurious. But you would expect that in a way. You've got more consumers who are thinking more about the brand that they are using. So they also give them more of the luxurious perceptions. So it is counterintuitive, but it works in exactly the same way.
Because luxury brands certainly made it difficult to get hold of their product. And I know it's certainly not every product, but I know Hermes do invite only, and you've got to be on their list and have bought something to get an invite. And it feels like they're deliberately making it harder to find their products, see their products, and buy their products. And all that does is make more people want them. But actually, the more physical availability you have, the more people see that demand and want that demand. Right. Okay.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, it is making it easy for someone to buy if they can buy it. And again, the can buy it is important. Do you have the portfolio? And, again, physical availability is also portfolio.
Yeah.
So you can have portfolio, which some of this is very hard to buy, like for all cars. Yep. And some of it is much easier to buy because the price is cheaper. So you can be a premium brand, but have a portfolio which is allowing many to participate. Yep. Right? And I think that's the
Sorry, I was talking over you there, Magda. Sorry, I said, but that's where some of the bigger premium houses and luxury houses actually make most of their money, isn't it? Gucci make more money on watches and perfumes and belts than on anything else that they make because they're a little bit more accessible. Still quite expensive for their category, for a belt, but it's accessible and therefore people buy it and jump in. So.
Absolutely.
Yeah. Okay. Well, look, luxury is not my world. Luxury companies never come and talk to me. I'm fascinated by it because it confuses the hell out of me, which is probably why I don't get any.
And also, how you think about luxury is also a question because, some organizations will consider some cosmetics organizations will consider the most premium offerings as luxury, and then you are talking to a real luxury company and you say, oh, like, that's not luxury at all. So it is a really blurry area, I think. Again, I think thinking about price points, thinking about the willingness to let people in, breaking the barriers, I think that's the language to be used, because for what's luxury for one person is not luxury for others. And I think a good portfolio caters either for all or is aware that there will be a barrier to penetration.
So you've mentioned pricing a couple of times as well. And another great marketing thinker and occasional thorn in the side of the Ehrenberg-Bass Institute, Mark Ritson, who probably lives a long stone's throw from where you are. Okay, Tasmania is a long way away, but the south bit of Australia. When he was on the podcast, I said to him, is there anything in marketing that marketers are worse at than pricing? So I'm going to ask you the same question. Is there anything in marketing that marketers do worse than pricing?
It's a good question. Now I'm kind of influenced by your pricing. I
framed the question in a way. I feel like it's not a trick question either. I genuinely think marketers are hopeless at pricing things because I just don't think we teach enough of the science behind it and the maths or the economics or whatever you call it to understand the impact of the decisions that are made. So price promotions, for example, or other things. And often, in my experience, it's not actually marketers who get involved in pricing because they're so terrible at it. So I don't know. That's why I phrased it in that way. I'm certainly not.
No, I think generally, knowing finance and being in the discussions and having that cross-functional mindset, the enterprise-wide mindset, is something which is extremely important in the marketing profession. Mm-hmm. So I think, of course, we need to have functional excellence and expertise, and that's really, really important. But creating silos between marketing, sales, having different language, different objectives, not allowing them to blend together, I think that's a bigger problem, than just pricing. I think pricing is probably an effect which you can see coming from all the different reasons why we are not close to what's happening then with the price. I think the bigger problem is that in many organizations, people don't talk to each other. I can see many organizations which do this now excellently. That's why when you ask me about is there anything worse, I think there is, and I think the stolen, bought, shifted share mindset is worse for me than pricing itself, because I can put many things into that bucket of not thinking about earning share, not doing something in a hard way, rather than only using the lever of, price up and down. And actually I can see up and down being done not well, or, thinking about innovation as only limited time offerings because we can do this quickly, and not pushing ourselves to actually think about innovation, not in terms of only product, but also process, route to market, route to mind. Big problem. Innovation is perceived as, a very, very narrow.
Somebody else's job that takes place over there, isn't it? Innovation. It's
Exactly. So I think the big kind of issue is, having a very narrow toolbox, and then pricing is one of those things which, is in the control, and that's why we think it's in our control. But again, going back to that, thinking about competition. We are in a competitive context. Mm-hmm. We know that consumers are buying from a repertoire of brands. Yeah. So what we are doing up and down with price will have impact on how our brands will be bought long term. And again, just understanding of all of this. I'm not sure if I answered your question, but I think pricing for me is one of the parts, which is probably an outcome of many other sometimes issues, both in the organization, how the different functions are organized, how do they look at data, how sophisticated they are thinking about pricing of the portfolio.
Yeah. I've actually changed my mind while you've been talking as well there, and because I asked Ritson that question probably 3 years ago now, maybe
Yeah.
4, and I did genuinely think at the time pricing was the biggest problem, but now
Hmm.
actually I think it's talking to your customers. I think so
Hmm.
many marketing teams now are so removed from where their customer comes, and it's almost like there's a maverick in every team who says something like, "Oh well, I've been down into the retailer and I've watched people buy our product," and people are
Hmm.
like, you're a bit weird. What have you been doing that for? I know some organizations have got this really finely done, like McDonald's, you have to
Yes.
go and work in store and things, but
Yeah.
like you can probably think of the 3, 4, 5 companies who do it really, really well. And that's because everybody else does it really, really badly. And I'm a big advocate of talking to your customers because I think that's where all of it starts from, by
Yeah.
understanding the problem you solve for them.
Yeah,
Everything
I think
becomes easier. Yeah.
observation. I think you're spot on. I think observation, getting into our consumers' shoes and understanding the customer, I think is extremely important, right? Because we are all, you know, and I'm talking we, but I'm thinking if you were working in a company selling shoes or butter or chocolate, you are so focused on your brands and how great they are and how amazing we are, and but consumers don't think this way. They behave in strange things, in fascinating ways.
Yeah.
They may be frustrating to us. They will do something and it's like, why they have done that? Like that's not what I was planning in my plan. This is not how they were supposed to do it, but they do it, and consumers are like this. And I think understanding that, and then understanding that there are some patterns. We can do this both in looking at people, how they behave in a store, how they consume at home, but also how they behave in our data, panel data. I think is very undervalued. It's so amazing in terms of understanding consumer behavior. If you don't have panel data, you are collecting the data, you're asking people questions, that's fine as well, but really get dirty with how the category is bought, how consumers behave,
Yeah.
and then bring your brand in that context. So 100% on this with you.
Absolutely. I love that answer. I'm going to clip that up and use it in the promotion. Thank you very much. So my kind of final-ish question for you. You've been a marketing researcher, or you've been researching marketing. I'll put it that way because market research is something else. Researching marketing for your whole career. And if you go to a lot of conferences as well, and I'm sure at the conferences you speak at, somebody jumps on stage and says, marketing's changing more now than it has ever before. AI and do you just sit and roll your eyes because you see it maybe hasn't, or do you think it is changing faster than ever before? Where do you land on that?
Yeah, I've been working for many years. I was privileged enough to work with Bruce McCall, who is the ex-CMO of Mars, 23 years at Mars. And he was always giving that example of, when he started, don't know how many years ago, he was also told this, that it's all changing so fast. And every year for the next 23 years, he's told everything is changing. Yes, it is. I mean, the world is changing, and that's great. And I think, the question is, what changes are important for us to understand when it comes to consumer behavior? I mean, you've got different retailers appearing, different media environments, you've got e-com. So, asking question, okay, fascinating. How does it, change what we know now? That's a new condition. Let's have a look, instead of assuming, instead of having an opinion or jumping on shadows, let's check. And, again, being fascinated about this. But yes, it happens absolutely all the time. And we always say, yes, absolutely, it is changing. It is changing. It is like young people are different. They always were.
Of course.
They always were. They always behaved in odd, strange ways. They always shopped in different ways, watched different movies, listened to different music, and that's great. Okay, but fantastic.
My mum's just turned 80 this year, last month. God bless her. She's just turned 80.
Happy
And
birthday.
she talks about so she grew up at the outburst of rock and roll. And she grew up kind of 45, 50 miles from where the Beatles were from, Liverpool, and they exploded on stage, just 50 miles away. And, so my mum is nothing but, she's an old lady now. She walks with a little frame, and she's the opposite of being young, hip and trendy. But, she was once. And back then, she told me about my granddad saying things like, this music's rubbish. It'll never last. Why are you wearing a miniskirt? All these things, it's like young people were different, and the older generations didn't know what was wrong with them when they liked this rubbish music, and the Beatles will never count for anything. And yet we're still doing the same things now, but seemingly thinking that everything's changed. You go, it's just the same as it was, isn't it? It's just the same cycle.
Yeah, absolutely. And again, just having that approach of, let's see how different they are, and which differences demand our attention as marketers. And I think just one thing, I think the research we do in the institute, yes, it's marketing science, but it's evidence-based approach to growth. And I think that's something which, again, it can never be just one discipline sport. It has to be enterprise-wide and cross-functional. And I think that's something which is extremely important for everyone to understand, that, it's not only that marketing function. And if we leave the knowledge, the evidence-based approach with just marketing function, we will not get their required outcomes. So
I love it. And that slight change in language also puts marketing right at the center of the organization, doesn't it? You've got to be there to influence all these things, not just to stick on.
And to bring everyone on board with the language, right? I mean, it is important for, again, all functions. It is much more than just the red book. And I think, I've seen something on LinkedIn last week about, if we just focus on the red book, we are some things about, we may be making some bad decisions. I'm thinking no person in the organization never ever would base the whole strategy of the organization on just one thing. I think this would be really unwise. Having that, again, that toolbox of that's our evidence-based approach to how we grow brands. Now, how does it apply to us in our context, for our categories, which brands to focus on, how to price them, so many different questions which you might have. So it is all about putting the knowledge in the context and asking the right questions. I think that's what I would love to see more in organizations.
It's almost like we're back to where we started with learn, test, and learn.
Absolutely.
Yeah. Build from it. Don't just slavishly accept it. So fantastic. Well, my last question, which I ask to everybody, is can you recommend a book or a resource or something like that? Now, I think I might be able to read your mind and guess what book you might suggest people read, but what resources or things would you recommend people look at?
I think, I would not be from here if I wouldn't say that, you should start from How Brands Grow and How Brands Grow Too. And, obviously other books that we have, the Distinctive Assets, Better Brand Health. But I think reading How Brands Grow, seeing how you feel, go back to your data, start thinking about what does it mean for your brands, for your categories. Do you see the patterns? Do you see any oddities in the data? How does it apply? Start asking the right questions. I think, reading is one thing. Accepting what is in there is one thing, but seeing this in your data, thinking about, okay, what would that change? What will I do less of? What would I do more of? How people are going, what will that change to people's days? Or if they will come back to work on Monday, or what would that change for our approach to pricing or the way we are planning media? And I think that's probably more important than, just reading. I think it is how you then put this in context, how you then apply your thinking hat and that curiosity of what does it mean for us every single day. That's, I think, much more important than reading. And then second thing, read widely. Read widely. I think if you just read one thing and you stay with that, it becomes, really just one-sided. I think making sure that you know both sides and you understand, why one is more likely to lead you to growth versus another. Ask the right questions, look at the data. But I think reading widely and, being exposed to things from different disciplines, amazing.
I love that. Thank you very much. Yeah, read widely, challenge yourself. And then apply it. That's the key thing, isn't it? It's not just the knowledge, it's the application of that knowledge as well. So.
Absolutely.
Well, look, Magda, you've joined me at a ridiculously early hour in Adelaide. Time zones confuse the hell out of me, but it's late here, early there. So thank you very much for going into the office early, and thank you for your time on this interview. It's been wonderful to have you on.
Thank you. Thank you so much, and I hope you guys enjoyed it.
Thank you.